just need a white. All set? Or I could use the report. Except there's a lot of blackout, which we'll get to in a moment. This may actually be the best way to begin. As you can see, there are redactions here that are deeply troubling. I want to see the full report, and I want to see all of the evidence underlying it, the documents and testimony, and I want to hear from Bob Mueller. I am here to give you some initial impressions based on a quick review of this very lengthy and detailed document and some of the press reports that I've seen so far. But I want to emphasize the discrepancy between the sunshine spin that we saw from the Attorney General this morning and the detailed description of wrongdoing in this report. What's demonstrated in powerful and compelling detail in this report is nothing less than a national scandal. And this report is far from the end of the inquiry that this country needs and deserves. It is the beginning of another chapter. I will be asking for Robert Mueller to testify, for an unredacted copy of this report, for all of the evidence and findings that underlie it, and for other testimony, including William Barr, who has agreed to testify in early May. Again, I have read this report very quickly, focusing mainly on the summary, and I'm going to be reviewing it in great detail and coming back with some additional conclusions based on that review. But clearly, there are profoundly disturbing details here. The report shows an attack by the Russians on our democracy, a concerted and focused attack on America with the express purpose of aiding the Trump campaign, and that attack was welcomed by the Trump campaign. And the report shows links, communication, and connection between associates of the Trump campaign and that Russian attack. It shows 10 separate instances of obstruction of justice. While it says that it reaches no conclusion, it also does not exonerate the president on the issue of obstruction. And those 10 instances of alleged obstruction are themselves deeply troubling. The fact that there have been 7 guilty pleas and conviction and 37 indictments attests to the success so far of this investigation. But there is need now for Congress to act and fulfill its independent oversight responsibility. And that task falls to the Senate Judiciary Committee, where I serve, and the House Judiciary Committee. I will support the House Judiciary Committee's subpoenas for additional material and witnesses if necessary, and I hope the Senate Committee will do the same. But clearly there have been lies by the president as well as by his associates and members of his own team. The evidence that underlies this report comes from the president's own team. They are not claims or allegations from someone outside the Trump orbit. Those 6 guilty pleas, and convictions of Trump associates attest to the involvement of the Trump campaign and Trump's own inner circle. So I look forward to reviewing this report in much greater detail. Those are my impressions at this point, and I hope to be back with you in the coming days.
The rollout of this, Senator, do you think that all this was designed to try to protect the president?
Attorney General Barr clearly was protecting the president, acting as his lawyer, not the American people's. It's a sad day for the Department of Justice, diminishing the independent law enforcement responsibility of DOJ and showing that the Attorney General of the United States here was acting as the president's lawyer, not the people's. The sunshine spin that he put on this report is clearly belied by the detailed, documented evidence of wrongdoing that it presents. No exoneration of the president on obstruction of justice. An inability to establish criminal intent, but far from the kind of whitewash that the Attorney General put on it.
We know that your Democratic colleagues in the House are going to move forward with subpoenas, as you mentioned, but do you have any faith that in the Republican-controlled Senate any of those things are going to happen?
I have a measure that's been proposed that provides for the full report with all the evidence and findings.
But you're not in charge.
And I'm not in charge, but that bill has bipartisan support. The former chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee and a senior Republican, Senator Grassley, is my co-sponsor. We have another Republican who has joined us, Senator Kennedy of Louisiana, as well as another Democrat. I have hope that we will move forward with that bill that would require full and complete disclosure of all the findings and evidence.
Disclosure to just lawmakers or to the public in general, and how do you reconcile all those privacy issues?
Well, the privacy issues can be addressed in its release to the public. But the Attorney General has been derelict in failing to petition the court for the grand jury material to be released. The evidence that comes from ongoing investigations can be redacted for the public, but the Congress should see it, as we should see also the grand jury material and the classified material. We see this kind of material all the time. There is no need to redact it for the Congress, and even the privacy materials are relatively limited in scope. Social security numbers, home addresses. But an unredacted report should be provided to the Congress.
What about the whole question of coordination and conspiracy between the Trump campaign, representatives, and the Russian government? I haven't had a chance to look at that summary. You just said it doesn't exonerate the president of obstruction of justice. What about on this central issue of were people in the Trump circle, in the Trump campaign, working with Russia?
Well, this document lays out a pattern of communication and links between Trump associates and the Russians. It concludes that there is insufficient evidence to establish a conspiracy, which requires proof beyond a reasonable doubt. It also says that lies by Trump members of the inner circle materially affected the ability to pursue the investigation. So I want to review in detail all of the evidence that's presented here. I'm not reaching conclusions. I've been a prosecutor. I know I have to review all of the evidence in detail. I am not giving my conclusions here, but there is a tremendous compelling level of detail here that needs to be reviewed, and the American people deserve to fully digest and review it as well.
And how can you, excuse me, go ahead, just follow up, and how can you say that it doesn't exonerate Ford? I mean,
That's what the Attorney General said.
Can I clarify, did you say previously, in the last, I don't know, 6 weeks or something, hadn't you said on television that there was evidence of collusion? Take us through that, or that there was evidence in your mind of conspiracy? Refresh my recollection on that.
I have said there's a credible case of obstruction of justice against the president, which is certainly substantiated by this report. It reaches no conclusion on whether the president should be indicted, but it presents a credible case of obstruction. And there is a wealth of detail, compelling and granular detail about those 10 instances, separate instances, including firing James Comey, efforts to shut down the investigation, and to interfere with it. Now, on the issue of criminal intent, clearly there is a need for additional evidence before there would be any indictment, but I want to review this document, again, reaching no conclusion, but the American people deserve to see the full report.
And in your mind, should Barr not be the Attorney General, as far as you're concerned? I mean, should he be removed, replaced?
His credibility has been severely undermined, and his stature gravely diminished.
What do you think of just the president's tweet with the Game of Thrones font that says "Game over, no collusion, no obstruction"?
Well, no collusion, no obstruction are belied by this report. The report contradicts the president, as it does the Attorney General, in their sunshine spin and whitewash. People should read the report.
But is it game over as far as the criminal prosecution goes?
Again, I want to review this report in detail. There is an issue about whether a sitting president can be indicted. That's a legal issue. There are other issues that need to be reviewed before there are any conclusions in this report. The special counsel's work is done, but clearly there are ongoing investigations, because that's the reason that a lot of the material has been redacted. So there are ongoing investigations by the Department of Justice, including a number in New York, in the Southern District, where the president has been named, in effect, as an unindicted co-conspirator. He's individual number one, an unindicted co-conspirator. That investigation is ongoing. So there is still more to be done here. But I really want to emphasize what really has been most stunning and chilling for me, and that is the Russian attack on our democracy, a concerted and effective social media and hacking campaign done by the Russian GRU. 12 of those operatives have been indicted and apparently welcomed by the Trump campaign. The president himself denied that interference. He has chosen to believe Vladimir Putin over our own intelligence community, and that is an ongoing danger to our democracy, because the Russians are continuing their attack, and they will do it again unless they are made to pay a price. And the portions of the obstruction section of this report, which show the president's conversations with Dan Coates and Admiral Rogers, I commend particularly to your attention, because they show an effort that is seriously disturbing.
Based on this report and what you know now, I mean, should the president be impeached?
You know, I really want to review this report to decide what remedies ought to be pursued in congressional investigations that are ongoing. And I'm not suggesting in any way that there should be impeachment proceeding, but I think there's a need for oversight to prevent this Russian attack from occurring again. We need to protect our democracy. And I'm not going to mention any sort of outcomes specifically or comment on them.
Do you think it is better to leave the decision as to, after this report comes out, that Trump's fate should be decided by the voters in 2020 and not an attempt in the Congress to remove them? I mean, any thoughts on that?
Again, I really want to read this report in detail, in its entirety, before I comment on the specifics of what Congress should do.
Well, that's an interesting. Do you think that Democrats risk getting too far out ahead of themselves on this issue? I mean, it's a 48-page report. I don't think there's many of us in this room that have the chance to look at it. Is there a risk that sort of getting ahead of your skis, as they say, almost?
Well, there would be if I commented on
I know
what
you're-
Congress should do in reaction to the report. So I'm not going to
Well,
go down that road.
Well, I'm asking you, is there a concern that some of your Democratic colleagues could be a little overzealous and then make it difficult later on to discuss substantive findings in this report, substantive and concerning findings in this report?
Let me just emphasize the details in this report about the Russian attack on our democracy are truly chilling and frightening and raise the specter of the president failing to heed that danger. We should focus on that very substantive peril to our democracy that will be raised again in the upcoming election. And the president's apparent trust in Vladimir Putin over our intelligence community is all the more frightening after reading this report. I want to focus on all of the detail. I will be happy to come back, if not tomorrow, next week, and I'm going to have a fuller...
5 o'clock today?
Sorry?
5 o'clock today?
Well, I may not be quite finished by 5 o'clock today, but I'm doing my best. Thanks, everyone.